When you look at this franchise, what do you see? Do you see the factory of sadness? Do you see the graveyard where quarterbacks go to die? Do you see the only team in modern history to lose 16 games in a single season? It's easy to laugh. It's easy to call them the worst organization in sports. But if you look closer, if you blow away the dust, you realize something terrifying. This wasn't supposed to be a tragedy. It was designed to be a dynasty. Bill Belichick, Nick Saban, Ozzie Newsome, the greatest minds in football history didn't just pass through here, they built a monster here. So how does a team with the perfect blueprint become the laughingstock of the world? Simple. They didn't fail, they were robbed. And the fingerprints of the crime are still on the trophies in another city. This isn't a story about bad luck. This is the story of the greatest heist in NFL history.
To understand the magnitude of the fall, you first have to understand the height from which they fell. There is a whole generation of fans who only know Cleveland as a punchline. But before the memes, before the misery, the Browns were not just good, they were royalty. In the 1950s, under Paul Brown, this team invented modern football. They didn't just play the game, they revolutionized it. Look at Otto Graham. 10 seasons, 10 championship games, 7 titles. It was a level of dominance that even the modern dynasties couldn't replicate. Then came Jim Brown, an unstoppable force of nature, a man who didn't run around defenders but through them. For decades, Cleveland was the capital of the football world. Winning wasn't a hope, it was a routine. It was their birthright. But looking back at those black and white films now, it feels like watching a ghost story, because the higher you build the monument, the harder it shatters when it finally hits the ground.
Fast forward to the 1980s. The glorious black and white days were gone, but a new hope had emerged. The team was electric. They had the talent, they had the grit, and they had Bernie Kosar, a quarterback who wasn't just a player, but a local hero who understood what this team meant to the city. They were knocking on the door of the Super Bowl, not once, but twice. They were inches away from reclaiming the throne. But then the universe intervened. First, it was the drive. 98 yards, 5 minutes. John Elway tearing through the defense like a surgeon, silencing a stadium of 80,000 screaming fans. And just when the wound started to heal, came the fumble. 1 yard line, one moment to tie the game, one slip that shattered a million hearts. It wasn't just a loss, it felt like a cosmic joke. It was the moment when the city started to whisper that word, curse. But even in that pain, there was dignity. They fell, but they fell fighting. They didn't know that a much darker shadow was approaching, a betrayal that would make a lost game feel like a mercy. By the early 90s, the city was ready for a change, and they got it in the form of a brilliant, grumpy young coach named Bill Belichick. At first, people didn't know what to make of him. He was cold, he was distant, he cut the most popular player on the team. But behind closed doors, he was building a war machine. Look at the staff he assembled. Nick Saban, the greatest college coach of all time, was his defensive coordinator. Ozzie Newsome, a future Hall of Fame executive, was in the front office. It was an embarrassment of riches, a think tank of football geniuses gathered in one building. And it started to work. By 1994, the defense was suffocating. The system was clicking. They won a playoff game against the Patriots, irony at its finest. You could feel it in the air. This wasn't just a good team, it was a dynasty in its infancy. A sleeping giant was waking up. But just as the machine was starting to hum, the man in the owner's box was making phone calls that would silence it forever. While the city was dreaming of a Super Bowl, the man in the owner's box was dreaming of a way out. Art Modell, a man who claimed to love Cleveland but loved his wallet more. He was drowning in debt, and instead of fixing his own mistakes, he decided to sell the soul of the city to pay for him. It happened in November 1995, in the middle of the season. A secret deal struck in the shadows. When the news broke, it didn't feel like a business decision. It felt like a death in the family. Imagine the scene, a team still fighting for a playoff spot, playing in front of a crowd that knew they were leaving. Fans ripping advertising signs off the stadium walls. Grown men weeping in the stands. Anger, confusion, absolute heartbreak. He wasn't just moving a franchise, he was ripping the heart out of a blue-collar town that had nothing else to hold on to. He took the players, he took the staff, he took the hope, and he left Cleveland with nothing but an empty shell and a promise of a new team that would never be the same.
The theft was complete. The Cleveland Browns were gone, and in their place, in a new city, rose the Baltimore Ravens. And here's the twist that makes this story truly tragic. It wasn't a new beginning, it was a continuation. That coaching staff Belichick assembled, many of them went to Baltimore.
That scouting department, led by Ozzie Newsome, they went to Baltimore. The foundational players, they went to Baltimore. And just 4 seasons later, 4 seasons, that same foundation, built in Cleveland, hoisted the Lombardi Trophy as Baltimore Ravens. Think about that. The confetti fell in the wrong city. The parade marched down the wrong streets. It was the ultimate proof the plan was working. The dynasty was real. Cleveland wasn't cursed with bad football. It was cursed with a stolen destiny. They watched their own success story happen to someone else. 3 years passed in the dark. And then, in 1999, the NFL gave Cleveland its team back. The uniforms were the same. The orange helmets were back. The name was back. But the soul was missing. This wasn't the team of Otto Graham or Bernie Kosar. This was a hasty resurrection, an expansion team built on a graveyard of promises. While Baltimore was perfecting the masterpiece they stole, the new Browns were starting from scratch, with one hand tied behind their back. The infrastructure was gone. The genius minds were gone. They were left with a roster of castaways and rookies thrown into the fire against established powerhouses. It was like watching a zombie. It walked like the Browns, it looked like the Browns, but there was no life behind its eyes. And the real curse? It wasn't magic. It was incompetence, born from the chaos of an unprecedented restart. You can't talk about the new Browns without talking about the graveyard. There is an image that every NFL fan knows, a fan in the stands wearing a jersey with a piece of duct tape on the back. On that tape, a list of names: Tim Couch, Brady Quinn, Brandon Weeden, Johnny Manziel. The list goes on and on, 20, 25, 30 different starting quarterbacks since 1999. Some were saviors, some were busts, some were just unlucky, but they all shared the same fate. Cleveland became the place where talent went to die. It wasn't just bad scouting, it was a systemic failure. No offensive line to protect them, no receivers to catch the ball, just a revolving door of young men thrown to the wolves, one after another, until their confidence was shattered. The jersey became a running joke, but for Cleveland, it was a scroll of the dead.
And then came 2017, the year they achieved perfection in the worst way possible. 0 wins, 16 losses. It is statistically harder to lose every single game in an NFL season than it is to win most of them. It requires a perfect storm of incompetence, bad luck, and broken spirits. But here's the most Cleveland part of the story. When the season ended, the fans didn't riot. They threw a parade. Thousands of people lined the streets in freezing temperatures, not to celebrate, but to mourn together, to laugh so they wouldn't cry. They held signs that said "perfect season," with a bitter irony that only this city could understand. It was rock bottom, a moment of pure, unfiltered humiliation. But it was also a strange act of defiance, a statement that said, "You can beat us, you can break our hearts, you can steal our team, but you cannot kill our loyalty."
Since that perfect failure, there have been flickers of light in the darkness. A charismatic young quarterback finally won a playoff game, making the city believe, just for a moment, that the suffering was over. But hope is a dangerous thing in Cleveland. That light faded too. New regimes came, massive gambles were taken, and the cycle seems to continue. So today we are left with the question: what is the truth about the Cleveland Browns? Is this franchise truly cursed by the football gods? Is it just decades of staggering incompetence? Or is the reality much simpler and much sadder? Maybe the curse isn't magical at all. Maybe it was signed into existence on that night in 1995. Maybe when they stole the team, they broke something fundamental that hasn't been fixed since. Everything we have seen for the last 25 years has just been a ghost trying to remember how to live. But if there is one thing history has taught us about this city, is that they never stop waiting for the sun to rise.